hosted by myself, Lance Johnson, a filmmaker and video editor based in Brooklyn, New York. I know, another podcast in a sea of podcasts, but I think I have something special here with this one, because I'm going to have real and... Sorry to cut my own self off there, but I think I was right. I think I have something special here. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the See-Through Podcast. I'm your host, Lance Johnson, and as I kind of hinted to in the beginning of this episode, today is a very special episode. Today marks the 100th episode of this podcast. So I'm going to give myself a pat on the back. And beyond giving myself a pat on the back, I wanted to kind of do things a little differently in this episode. In this episode, I want to uncover and discuss 6 hard truths that I have learned while doing this podcast. You know, I got a lot of data now to pull from, so I wanted to share some insights that I've learned along the way and kind of reflect and kind of celebrate what I've done in the 100 episodes. So let's get into it. So 100 episodes, which feels unreal. It honestly feels amazing that I'm recording this episode. I've been waiting to record this episode for a very long time. When I posted my first episode on May 20th of 2020, my goal for this podcast was to hit 100 episodes. I told myself, whatever I do, just hit 100 episodes and then you can decide what you want to do afterwards. So I'm very proud of myself that I've hit 100 episodes, and I could not have got to this point without everyone's encouraging messages, you know, the people who agreed to come on to the podcast and talk to me, anyone who's bought any merch, you know, followed me on social media, subscribed to this channel, like all of you, all these little wins that I've received along the way have added up and have provided fuel for me to keep going, because there were so many times where I felt like quitting this podcast. I'll be completely honest. This podcast, while passion project, while I love doing it, takes up a lot of my time and energy. And there were times, plenty of times, where I almost lost steam, and out of the blue, I'd get an encouraging message, and that message would keep me going. So again, I just want to thank anyone out there who's invested any time at all into this podcast. Thank you. It means the world to me. All right, so that's enough of me being reflective and sappy. I know I almost bored everyone with that little segment, but I just wanted to thank everyone. But let's get into these 6 hard truths, and I want to start this by saying these are in no particular order, so don't put any weight on what I talk about first or last. And also, these are obviously my personal opinion. You may disagree, you may agree, and if you agree, comment and let me know. If you disagree, comment and let me know. I'd love to start a discussion with these topics. Here's truth number 1. So my first hard truth is that blindness and disability culture is boring to society. So why do people think it's boring when it's not boring? Because I don't think it is boring. I just think society finds it boring. I think the reason why society finds this type of content boring is because there's so much other types of content out there that actually makes sense to them. I think disabilities and blindness is very foreign to a lot of people out there unless they are dealing with it with themselves or someone they love or someone they know. And if you don't know anyone in the BVI or disability community, you probably are not going to want to hear about it because it's just not something you're interested in. It's not like a hobby of yours. And I think society finds it boring because there's so many other types of content out there to indulge in. Like there's true crime podcasts, there's comedy podcasts, you know, there's music on Spotify, you know, there's fitness podcasts. Basically, there's types of entertainment out there that are built for and created for, you know, universal appeal that a massive amount of people are interested in, and therefore a massive amount of people will, you know, listen and tune into. So when you have a niche like blindness or disabilities, the audience, the market's already pretty small. It's growing because there's so many new influencers out there. There's so many new creators within this space. But we are all competing against the top entertainment out there for people's time and attention. And people only have so much time and attention, they can spend in their day. So if you're not a part of the blindness community, the disability community, you may find it interesting, but you may not find it as interesting as, let's say, your favorite comedian, going on another one of your favorite comedians' podcast. The average person is going to tune into that more than they are going to tune into some sort of niche, small channel or podcast. And that's just the reality to it. Like this podcast is on all the same platforms that all those other podcasts are on. So it's hard to compete and it's hard to get people's attention and time. Another reason that I think this type of content isn't that like accessible for, the sighted world or the non-disabled world is that world is fearful of disabilities and blindness. Like I saw a New York Times article where I think they did like a study and they basically polled people to try to figure out what everyone's worst fear was. And people's worst fear was going blind. So when you have a fear of something, you may not want to learn about it because it might just make your fear even stronger. When in fact, it's quite the opposite. Like the more you dive into this subject matter, like for example, me starting this podcast, I was way less accepting of my vision loss than I am now because I've been diving into this world. But for someone who's sighted, when they hear and learn about blindness, they might feel pity, they might feel fear, they might feel sadness for the people talking about it. That's kind of unfair because all we are trying to do on this side of the world is just talk about life and what our lives are like and how, we're people with a disability and we have, interesting lives, interesting perspectives. And that's really all this is. So yeah, I definitely think fear plays a part into it. There's a fear of the unknown. They might not want to dive into this world. All right, here's my second hard truth. Having a disability does not make you special. I know that sounds harsh, but what I mean by that is statistically, disabilities are very common. So therefore, if something's common, it can't be special. Therefore, you can't be special just because you have a disability. So let's frame that with the eye disease I have, retinitis pigmentosa. There are 334 million Americans, and it's estimated that 100,000 Americans have RP. 100,000 feels really tiny in the grand scheme of things, but it's still 100,000 people. So I can't feel that special about having RP. There's 99,999 more people in America who have it. My point is, RP is not what makes me unique. It's not what makes you unique or whatever disability you have. There are other people with your disability. So your disability does not define you. And it's statistically proven. All right, hard truth number 3. Life is hard, but living with a disability makes it even harder. You're probably going, no shit, Lance. Life would obviously be harder with a disability than without one. So yeah, you're right. That's pretty obvious. But I want to get into the why of it. I have a theory that there are 3 tenets to having a solid foundation for happiness or mental health. And those 3 things are money, relationships, and health. So the key to my theory is if one of those 3 categories of money and health and relationships gets kind of messed with or thrown out of sync, it'll throw everything else out of sync. So if one suffers, all categories suffer. And let's start with the most shallow category, money. Whether we like to admit it or not, money is a huge driving force for people, and it makes people do a lot of things that they do not want to do, therefore makes a lot of people unhappy. And money pays for obvious things that we need, like groceries, the energy bill, the car bill, whatever it is, money pays for it. And where do people get their money unless they're like a trust fund kid or something? They get it from their job that they have to go to and work day in and day out. And when it comes to the disability community and careers, this is where it gets tricky. The problem is the job market for people with disabilities is rough. It is rough. Like, for example, in the blindness community, 78% of the blind community is either unemployed or underemployed. That's such a high number. And I've heard from other people that it's even higher. That could be because there's not a lot of employment opportunities. A blind person probably can't be a bartender, probably can't be a server at a restaurant, can't be an Uber driver, So there are jobs that just become immediately off limits once you lose your vision. So the pool of open jobs that you can take shrinks. And also an employer might not want to accommodate a blind employee or may not think that a blind employee is going to be as productive as a sighted employee. So there's going to be a discrimination involved. Or it could be people in the blind community just want to keep receiving their SSI or SSDI checks. All three of those things kind of add up and create that high statistical number of unemployment. And to cover the other two, which are relationships and health, you really just got to think about that. If you're struggling financially, your focus is not going to be on getting a girlfriend or boyfriend or buying a house. You're going to be worried about getting employment and making a living. And when you're at a disadvantage there, you have to rely on other people, which may put a strain on relationships. It might be family members. It might even be your boyfriend or girlfriend that you already have. So now you are reliant on more people to just exist, which puts a strain on your mental health. That's going to impact your friendships. That's going to impact your relationships. It's going to impact your relationship with yourself. And it's hard to not be in a hole, whether that's a financial hole or spiritual hole, emotional hole, living with a disability. It kind of feels like you're playing a continuous game of catch up, with the rest of the world. Life is hard for people without disabilities. Even without a disability, you still got to find a job, make relationships, have a place to live, have transportation to wherever you're going. You got to be a good brother, sister, mother, father, grandma, son, friend, dog, dad, parent. It's hard. Life is hard. Throw a disability in the mix, and it's way harder. Truth number 4, blind people do not know what to call themselves. If you're currently a part of the blind and visually impaired community, then you have heard this phrase over and over and over again. And that phrase is blindness is a spectrum. So that means that there's total blindness where you don't see anything on one end. And then on the other side, you have visual impairments like someone who needs a pair of glasses to see sharply. I want to say around 90% of the blind community can see something. And that blows people's minds because most people think blind, they think, just total darkness, you can't see anything. So therefore, blindness is a spectrum was created to kind of describe that there's like varying versions of blindness. And what's controversial about blindness as a spectrum is that if you're not totally blind, you can still call yourself blind. So that means if you're legally blind and your field of vision is less than 20 degrees, or your visual acuity with corrective lenses is 2200 or worse, that would make you legally blind. Let's say you're at the high end of being legally blind. Let's say you have 19 degrees of vision. You're technically legally blind. Can you call yourself blind? The phrase blindness is a spectrum kind of alludes to that. And where that line gets drawn is kind of subjective. If you have 19 degrees of vision, can you call yourself blind? Or is that only reserved for people who, see lights and shadows or nothing at all? And that's where it gets tricky. And that's why I say blind people don't know what to call themselves. So for example, I have a friend who I think is blind, but he describes himself as visually impaired. He's legally blind. He's basically a full-time cane user. And he describes himself as visually impaired. And he thinks that blindness isn't a spectrum. He thinks blindness is kind of, you're either blind or you're not blind. And then I have people who see more than him who describe themselves as blind. See how it gets confusing? So to make it even more confusing, there are some people who describe themselves as low vision or partially sighted. So now you got visually impaired, partially sighted, low vision, legally blind, blind. It's 5 different words to describe the same thing in some instances. And I'll wrap this hard truth up quickly, but I just wanted to bring this up because when I talk to different guests, they describe themselves differently. And their field of visions are all different. And it kind of confirms that phrase, blindness is a spectrum. But then within the community itself, there's not a confirmation on where that line gets drawn. Like, when can you call yourself blind, I guess is my question. That's where it's up in the air. That's where it's unknown. It's not defined. That part in the spectrum where you can actually call yourself blind and it's fair use to call yourself blind. Hard truth number 5, don't bank on getting cured. I know this sounds harsh and I know this sounds negative, but it's highly unlikely that you are going to get cured in your lifetime. There are a lot of medical breakthroughs happening. There's a lot of research being done, and there's a lot of brilliant minds working on finding a cure for whatever condition you have. But it's highly unlikely that it's going to happen in your lifetime, and I wouldn't bank on it. And if it does happen in your lifetime, fucking brilliant. That's beautiful. I want that. I would love a cure for retinitis pigmentosa. I would take it. The problem with wanting a cure so bad that you want to be in la la land and you want to think that a cure is going to come around and it's going to be your deus ex machina, I think that's how you say it, or it's going to come and save you. It's just not reality. And what you're going to do is you're going to shortchange yourself. When I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with RP, and thinking about getting cured was kind of a way for me to put off processing it. I was like, well, by the time I'm older and this is affecting me, there will be a cure because they're working on X, Y, and Z. And guess what? Here I am, 33, still no cure. There's been major advancements, but still no cure. And, they told my mom that in, the 80s, still no cure. So my point is, don't let waiting for a cure or expectations of a cure prevent you from processing, your eye condition or disability. Start beginning that acceptance process. And the sooner you do, the better you'll feel about everything. And like I said, if the cure comes, wonderful, you'll take it. But either way, don't let it slow you down from living your life now to the best of its ability. And if that means getting cane training and learning technology that's going to help you adapt and be as functional as possible, don't hesitate. Don't wait for the cure. Start living now, I guess is my point. The last thing I'll say when it comes to this truth is it's not all on the shoulders of, the medical industry or the science industry or the technology industry to cure you. And what I mean by that is, if society became more accessible, for blind people, then in a way, that's kind of a cure for certain problems. It doesn't cure your vision. You're not going to be able to see, but you're going to be able to get around easier. Therefore, life is going to be easier. So also, society shouldn't bank on cures as much either. Society should meet in the middle of all this. The more accessible the world is, the less need for the cure. And that's what the medical and social models of disability are all about. You may have heard about that, where it's like the medical versus the social model. The medical model is curing you physically, physically curing you, like my vision gets healed. The social model is making like websites accessible, creating tech that's accessible, like screen readers, cane, making, public transit accessible for people with disabilities or blindness. In my opinion, both are equally valuable. Society shouldn't think like, oh, well, the medical community is working on curing this, so therefore we don't need to make it accessible. No, I actually think in the grand scheme of things, society should make things accessible, and in the medical world is just helping out. And I'll add this because I think it's very encouraging. If you are someone waiting for a cure and it's preventing you from, picking up a white cane, exposure therapy works. Pick up the cane. It'll become less scary the more you use it. And the more you adapt and the more you learn, the more confident you're going to feel, the less scary not getting cured is going to feel, because you're going to feel like, even if I don't get cured, I got this shit on lock. And that feeling of confidence isn't just handed to you. You got to work at it. You got to work on accepting yourself. You got to work on the mental health side of things. And you also got to work on the physical adaptation side of things. But the more work you put in, the more confident you're going to be, and the more you're going to not worry about even getting cured to begin with. But I just really wanted to plant a seed with that one for you. And again, I mean to not be negative. I mean to not be disrespectful. But I think that is a hard pill a lot of people tend to not want to swallow, is that they most likely will not be cured in their lifetime. And hard truth number 6 is disability excellence is the best way to combat negative stereotypes. And this one is pretty simple once I explain what disability excellence is. And disability excellence is just being excellent. It's very simple. You can achieve excellence at really anything, right? So if you're a tennis player and you become pro, that's achieving excellence. So if you're a disabled actor, that's a common, hot topic, should non-disabled actors be able to play disabled actors? Well, let's say you're a disabled actor. Are you good? Because if you're not good, you're not going to get the role. That's just how it is. If you want to get the role, work hard, take acting classes, rehearse your lines, practice, get better and better and better until you're getting the roles. Don't expect, to just get casted in the role because you're the one disabled person auditioning for the role. If you suck, you suck. You're not going to get the role. You have to be good at whatever you're doing. If you're writing a book, it better be a good book. It's not going to sell just because someone with a disability wrote the book. If you're a filmmaker and you make a movie, it better be a good movie. Just because a disabled person made the film doesn't mean that the film is going to be good. It doesn't mean that people are going to like the film. And it doesn't mean that it's going to get into film festivals. You still have to make good work. You still have to produce high quality, great work. And I think some people in the disability community, want to bank on things like DEI initiatives, and they want to get handed, whatever it is they're working on. Well, I was the blind person who auditioned, so I should have got the role. But what if you just suck at acting? Have you ever considered that you might just be terrible at what you do? So I'll give you an example. We got Tina Fermel. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. But she's a comedian, and she has cerebral palsy. And she worked her way up through the club scene. And then now she's a comedian at the Comedy Cellar. She was just on Jimmy Fallon tonight. And she's blowing up and touring. Do you think she could do all that, have all that success, if she wasn't a funny comedian? Comedy's comedy. Is it funny? That's really all that matters. Is it funny? Is it good? You can take that same logic to other things. Is it good? Don't just be the best disabled comedian. Be the best comedian. I guess a simple way to put it would be, just take your disability out of the equation. Don't aim to be the best disabled version of whatever you're doing. Aim to be the best version of whatever it is you're doing. And then you won't put a ceiling on yourself, and you'll be able to grow, and you'll just outshine everyone. That's how the world works. You have to outshine everyone. It's a very competitive world out there. Society isn't going to hand you a life-changing opportunity simply because of your disability. You have to have the talent and skills there that people are looking for to get those opportunities, because other people want those opportunities more. And if somebody wants it more than you, they deserve it more than you. Just because you have a disability doesn't mean you deserve shit. You got to earn your shit. And the world doesn't want that. The world doesn't want you to outshine them. The sighted guy doesn't want to get beat by a blind guy. Beat the fuck out of him. If someone is self-conscious and thinks they're inferior because they lost an opportunity and an opportunity was given to someone who's disabled who was better than them at it, that's on them. That's their own ableism that they have to deal with. But to limit yourself to certain opportunities just because of your disability, well, I guess that would be internalized ableism. Don't be ableist to yourself. Don't put a limit to what you're going to do. Be excellent. Be the best version of yourself. And now I'm just repeating myself. But this one gets me riled up. And I just want the best for everyone out there. I really do. I just don't want to put a ceiling on the disability community. I don't want there to be like, well, this is the best we can do as a whole. I just want to kind of smash that ceiling. And I want people in the disability community, in the blind community, to basically go as far up the ladder as they want to. And I want the spotlight to be shined on our community more because we deserve it. Because there are a lot of hardworking, very talented people in our community, and they are doing great things. And I hate when it gets categorized or, oh, he's pretty good for being blind, or that's pretty good for this. I want to replace that language to where it's undeniably good. It's good for anyone. It's good for anyone. All right, so that's the 6 hard truths that I want to cover at this point in my podcasting journey. I've done 100 episodes. Those 6, like I said, kind of encapsulate a lot of other hard truths. I kind of picked the 6 that I felt like covered the most ground. I have a lot more that I could talk about, and if this episode does well, I may do another one of these where I cover more truths that I've learned and share my 2 cents. And again, I want to say this is my personal opinion. So if you disagree or if you think I came off strongly, leave a comment. Let's start a conversation. What did I get wrong? What did I get right? I'd love to know people's opinions out there listening. But that does it for the 100th episode of the See-Through Podcast. Again, thanks for all of your support. I wouldn't have made it to episode 100 without all the encouragement I've received along the way. And I'm truly thankful for everyone listening. And for real, I want to hear from you. So hit me up. You can email me at the seethroughpodcast@gmail.com. You can direct message me on social media. Again, the handle is @seethroughpod. And also just a reminder that if you do want to buy merch for the holiday season, make sure to get your order in by December 10th to receive it by Christmas. I have one more episode coming out that I'm going to end the year on, which I'm excited about. So stay tuned for that episode. And again, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video. And if you're listening on streaming services, make sure to follow the podcast, rate the podcast, leave a review. It all helps. I appreciate anything that you can do to support me. And with all that said, you know the drill. Stay transparent, everyone.